Black elderly woman humiliated at the bank. Luckily, Vin Diesel was there. The First Pacific Bank on Wilshire Boulevard was buzzing with activity. Long lines snaked from the counters to the entrance, and the air was thick with frustration. Customers tapped their feet, checked their watches, and muttered under their breath. Behind the counter, employees rushed around, trying to keep up with the chaos. At one of the counters stood Linda Carter, a 73-year-old retired school teacher. She clutched an envelope in her slightly trembling hands, her face a mix of determination and worry. Linda had always been independent, but today she needed answers. Unexpected fees had been deducted from her account, small amounts, but enough to make a difference in her tight monthly budget. "Good afternoon," Linda said politely to the young teller, Brittany, who barely looked up from her computer. "I believe there's been a mistake in my account. I've been charged fees I wasn't informed about." Brittany sighed dramatically, her fingers still tapping on the keyboard. "Those are standard account maintenance fees, ma'am," she replied flatly. Linda hesitated. "But I've had this account for years, and I've never had these charges before." Brittany finally glanced at her, annoyance flashing in her eyes. She grabbed the envelope, flipped through the papers half-heartedly, and shoved them back. "It's in the fine print of your agreement. If you didn't read it, that's not our fault." Linda blinked, taken aback. "I just want to understand what happened," she said, her voice quieter, but still holding on to hope. At that moment, Carl Jensen, the branch manager, walked over. He had been watching from a distance, his arms crossed. Carl was a man who believed time was money, and in his mind, Linda Carter wasn't worth much of either. "Is there a problem here?" Carl asked, though his tone made it clear he wasn't expecting an answer. Brittany straightened up. "No, sir. Just a customer who doesn't understand our policies." Carl turned to Linda, his polite smile never reaching his eyes. "Ma'am, we have standard fees in place. If you can't maintain the minimum balance, there's nothing we can do." Linda squared her shoulders, gathering every ounce of dignity she had left. "I've always kept my account in good standing. These fees just started appearing. All I'm asking is for someone to review them." Carl let out a short, amused chuckle. "What's in the system is in the system, ma'am. We don't review automated charges." Then, leaning slightly over the counter, he added loudly, "If you can't afford the fees, maybe this bank isn't the right place for you." A sharp silence filled the room. Linda's throat tightened. She had never felt so small. Then a deep, steady voice cut through the air. "Why are you talking to her like that?" Everyone turned toward the entrance. A man in a black t-shirt, jeans, and a baseball cap stood there. At first glance, he looked like any ordinary customer, but there was something about him, his posture, his voice, his presence, that made people straighten up. Carl turned slowly, irritation flashing across his face. "And who are you to question how we handle our customers?" The man took a few steps forward, pulling off his cap. Gasps filled the room. It was Vin Diesel. Yes, that Vin Diesel. The Fast and Furious star, the action legend, the man who had played some of the toughest, most fearless characters on screen. And now, he was standing in the middle of the bank, staring Carl Jensen down. "It doesn't matter who I am," Vin said, his voice calm but firm. "What matters is why you're treating this woman like this." Carl cleared his throat, scrambling to regain control. "Sir, this is none of your business. We have policies in place, and this lady doesn't meet the requirements." Vin tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. Policies? Or an excuse to humiliate someone who's just asking for fairness? A few customers murmured in agreement. Brittany, who had seemed so confident earlier, now glanced nervously at Carl, waiting for him to fix this mess. Vin turned back to Linda, his voice gentler now. "Ma'am, what exactly is the problem? Can you show me what's going on?" Linda hesitated for a moment before handing the envelope to Vin. He took it carefully, scanning the documents inside. After a few seconds, he looked up at Carl, his expression unchanged. "This is a mistake," Vin said plainly. "These charges shouldn't be here. You're going to fix this." Carl opened his mouth, but Vin raised a hand, stopping him. "If it's a mistake, you'll fix it. If it's not—" His voice dropped slightly, becoming even more controlled. then it's going to be a much bigger problem for you. Carl's face paled. Brittany fidgeted nervously. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Vin crossed his arms, standing firm. Now, let's hear that apology. Carl clenched his jaw. Mrs. Carter, I apologize for the misunderstanding. Vin raised an eyebrow. Try again. Carl sighed. I apologize for the way you were treated. It was unacceptable. Linda nodded slowly. Thank you. Vin glanced around, making sure everyone had seen it. That wasn't so hard, was it? He turned toward the customers. Let this be a lesson. Speak up, stand up, and don't let anyone make you feel like you don't matter. With that, Vin Diesel put his cap back on and walked out of the bank. But the story wasn't over. The video of the confrontation went viral, and the consequences for Carl Jensen were just beginning. The bank launched an internal review, and Carl was removed from his position. Every customer affected by the unnecessary fees was refunded in full. As for Linda, she received a handwritten note from Vin Diesel a few days later. It read, Mrs. Carter, you didn't need me to stand up for you. You already had the strength. You just needed someone to remind you. Tucked inside the envelope was a signed Fast and Furious poster and an invitation to one of Vin's upcoming movie premieres. Linda smiled as she read the note. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen, valued, and unstoppable. The world wasn't perfect, but now she knew. When you fight for what's right, sometimes the right people show up to fight with you. Unique script. It was just another busy afternoon at the First Pacific Bank. The lines were long, the air was tense, and the tellers were doing their best to keep up. But in the middle of the chaos, something extraordinary happened. A moment that reminded everyone that kindness and courage can come from the most unexpected places. Linda Carter, a retired school teacher in her 70s, stood patiently in line. She had always been a woman of quiet strength, but today, she felt uneasy. For months, she had noticed strange fees on her bank statement, small amounts, but enough to make a difference in her tight budget. She had come to the bank to get answers. When it was finally her turn, Linda approached the counter with a polite smile. Good afternoon, she said to the young teller, Brittany, who barely looked up from her computer. I believe there's been a mistake in my account. I've been charged fees I wasn't informed about. Brittany sighed, her fingers still tapping on the keyboard. Those are standard fees, ma'am. It's in the fine print. Linda frowned. But I've had this account for over 30 years. I've never had these charges before. Brittany rolled her eyes. If you didn't read the agreement, that's not our fault. Linda's cheeks flushed with embarrassment, but she stood her ground. I just want to understand what's happening. Before Brittany could respond, the branch manager, Carl Jensen, appeared. He had been watching from a distance, his arms crossed. Is there a problem here? He asked, though his tone suggested he didn't care about the answer. Brittany straightened up. No, sir. Just a customer who doesn't understand our policies. Carl turned to Linda, his smile cold. Ma'am, if you can't maintain the minimum balance, these fees are standard. There's nothing we can do. Linda squared her shoulders. I've always kept my account in good standing. These fees just started appearing. All I'm asking is for someone to review them. Carl chuckled dismissively. What's in the system is in the system. If you can't afford the fees, maybe this bank isn't the right place for you. The word stung, and Linda felt her confidence waver. But before she could respond, a deep voice cut through the tension. Why are you talking to her like that? Everyone turned toward the entrance. A man in a black t-shirt and jeans stood there, his presence commanding attention. He removed his baseball cap, and the room erupted in whispers. It was Vin Diesel. Carl's confident demeanor faltered. Mr. Diesel, this is none of your business. Vin stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. It is my business when someone is being treated unfairly. He turned to Linda. Ma'am, can you show me what's going on? Linda handed him the envelope, and Vin quickly scanned the documents. These charges are a mistake, he said, looking directly at Carl. You're going to fix this. Now. Carl hesitated, but under Vin's unwavering gaze, he had no choice. He instructed Brittany to reverse the fees, and within minutes, Linda's account was corrected. Vin turned to the other customers. How many of you have had unexpected fees show up on your accounts? He asked. Slowly, hands began to rise. Vin nodded. This isn't just about one person. It's about fairness. By the end of the day, the bank had reversed fees for every affected customer, and Carl Jensen's career was hanging by a thread. The story spread like wildfire, and Vin Diesel's actions became a symbol of standing up for what's right. A few days later, Linda received a handwritten note from Vin. Mrs. Carter, you didn't need me to stand up for you. You already had the strength. You just needed someone to remind you. Tucked inside was a signed Fast and Furious poster and an invitation to one of his movie premieres. Linda smiled as she read the note. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen and valued. The world wasn't perfect, but now she knew. When you fight for what's right, sometimes the right people show up to fight with you.